2025 has already featured a robust selection of new TTRPG releases. From exciting new systems like Daggerheart, Drawsteel, and Cosmere, to very affordable Humble Bundles that make it easier than ever to explore alternative systems like Dragonbane, Call of Cthulhu, and Symbaroum. The TTRPG community is freer than ever to explore other systems to fit their preferences and playstyles. So where does that leave Dungeons & Dragons? It's been about a year since the release of the 2024 Player's Handbook, which isn't really an edition change, but is a major update to what we've gotten used to since the 2014 Player's Handbook. Hi, I'm John, and this is Dragon Mind, where we discover our best selves through gaming. And today, we're looking at the current state of Dungeons & Dragons for those of you who may not be keeping up with every little news drop. Let's get into it. Okay, before starting off, I do want to say I have been and still am a fan of D&D. The OGL fumble definitely curbed my enthusiasm for it, but I still really enjoy learning about the history of TTRPGs, of which D&D was a foundational part, and keeping up with the latest releases, mostly as a curiosity from a game design perspective. And between all of those things, I think my feelings are best summed up with a quote from Mike Mearls in an interview he did with gaming historian Ben Riggs. When you look back at the OGL, the real impact of it is that it made D&D uncool again. Maybe this is the best Player's Handbook ever written, but the vibes, the audience, the people playing these games, they don't seem excited about it. Now, I want to start off by saying, my opinion is that the 2024 Player's Handbook really is a superior version to 2014. The layout, the artwork, the organization of content is a much easier read to figure out the game and be able to confidently create a character that you'll enjoy. The subclasses are much better balanced against each other. I think a really good example of that is the Barbarian. In 2014, you had two options. You had the Berserker and the Totem Warrior. The Berserker was really bad, and the Totem Warrior went from all right to amazing. But now if you make a 2024 Barbarian, all four subclasses really are interesting. The Berserker, while not being complex, is, according to an optimizing channel, Treant Monk's Temple, the route you go to maximize martial character single target damage. Contrast that with the Wildheart, which is the updated Totem Warrior for sensitivity reasons, where each time you rage, you get to tap into one of the animal spirits to give you a specialized effect. Maybe you're fighting against an elemental creature and you need some damage resistance for survivability. Or maybe because you are dealing with an enemy that can punch through your damage resistance, instead you pick the Eagle or Wolf in order to try to double down on offense. The Zealot and World Tree are both also equally interesting in their own ways. Now, I still do have some minor gripes about it. I think that only presenting a certain number of backgrounds with no real customization option was an odd decision. I did really enjoy in 2014 how you could get an ability score increase and basically pick between full ASI, a half ASI with a minor feat benefit, or give up a stat increase for a really powerful feat. I miss that. I don't like how every feat basically gives you a stat bump now. And of course, I'm not the biggest fan of how they implemented weapon masteries. I think it was a really neat idea, and I think there was some way to make it slightly more interesting than every time I hit with a Warhammer, it pushes a creature a bunch. But again, overall, these are little nitpicks. Looking at D&D 2024, those three core books and how they work together, I really do think that it feels like a complete game. I mean, look at the Dungeon Master's Guide. It is not just this random collection of variant rules and random tables anymore. It is a step-by-step guide going from highest priority all the way to broadest applicability for new Dungeon Masters to feel confident stepping into the role for the first time. The Monster Manual actually has stat blocks that I feel comfortable playing right out of the box. And all of the challenges they present feel appropriate. High CR monsters, like we're talking CR 21 and 22, feel like they can fend off entire parties of mid to high level characters by themselves. Low CR creatures are a threat. They are easier to deal with, but if you have a careless player, they're going to make them hurt. So the whole narrative about D&D being this kind of mindless TTRPG where marshals just spam their best attacks and spell-casting characters can kind of get away with maybe a spell and some cantrips. I think the game is a lot more interesting now with the way that everything's been rebalanced. But it's because that the game feels so solid that all the extra UA stuff, it doesn't feel as exciting as it did leading up to, say, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything or Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Okay, I remember the series of UAs leading up to Tasha's. My playgroup would gobble up all of that content. And part of it was just that the subclasses felt fresh. So we had things like the Wildfire Druid. It definitely felt like a druid, but it was a mechanical and narrative angle that I personally hadn't seen before. The Way of Mercy Monk. All right, 2014 monks weren't that great, but the ideas in the Mercy Monk were really fresh. And then the Clockwork Soul Sorcerer. One of my favorite characters ever brought to my table was a Clockwork Soul, and both the narrative and mechanical contributions of that character made my games a lot more interesting. Even before the 2025 Monster Manual was released, we were already getting Unearthed Arcana playtests to build off this version of the game. In 2025 alone, we've gotten 7 packets, 29 subclasses, which don't count the subclasses in the revised Artificer or the new Scion. Half of those subclasses are just updates to old content. You know, like the Arcane Archer, the Hexblade, and the Knowledge Cleric. And whether a subclass is being presented as old content or new content, I think the thing that makes me really unexcited about any of this UA is that the designs feel templatized. Now, before I start in with my criticisms, I do want to acknowledge that the design team has lost 2 incredibly influential leaders in the past year. Jeremy Crawford and Chris Perkins went to work with Darrington Press. So it may be that they need a little bit of time to regain their footing. But that doesn't mean that the designs we're getting aren't stale. Take the Knowledge Cleric, for instance. In 2014, I don't think anybody was being like, Knowledge Cleric was my favorite. I found myself occasionally dipping a level with some of my characters because I found the skill expertises to be kind of nice. But when I thought of a Knowledge Cleric, I really thought of this kind of niche support character that had ways of gathering information that may prove useful for both the story and mechanical experience. But the new Knowledge Cleric is really just like a psychic subclass attached to the cleric base class. So it gets things like telepathy and mind spike and these other kind of psychic-y spells that make it feel similar to the aberrant mind sorcerer or the Great Old One Warlock. Sure, there might be some unique things that it does, but again, it feels like they're just taking these common themes, changing them just a little bit, and just pairing them up with different base classes they haven't done yet. So it doesn't even feel like a Knowledge Cleric, it feels like a Psychic Spells Cleric, which to me, I have enough psychic character options. Why would I need another one? Then you get things like the Scion of the Three Rogue, something that feels obviously inspired by Baldur's Gate 3. It is a really cool concept to attach to a rogue. It feels like the kind of character you'd play on a dirge run, but really looking at it, it kind of just feels like a fear subclass attached to the rogue. And then you get to like the Hollow Warden Ranger from the horror subclasses UA. And again, this is the ranger that makes people frightened. At one point, that was kind of a novel idea. I'm thinking of the Oath of Conquest Paladin. But now it just feels like they're taking Conquest Paladin mechanics and sticking it on a bunch of other classes. And there will always be people that will forgive any sort of mechanical design because they fall in love with the flavor. But for me personally, this kind of copy-paste feeling of a lot of these mechanical features just makes the game feel kind of samey. And again, looking at the 2024 Player's Handbook, a lot of the best designed subclasses from Xanathar's and Tasha's basically graduated up to being core. When I was flipping through my 2024 PHB and comparing it to player characters that my players had brought into my best D&D games, it was pretty much 1 for 1. There was only one subclass a player character brought that wasn't included in the new PHB. So if I were to run, say, a homebrew campaign, I don't need all this other stuff. Yes, it feels kind of setting specific. I know for a lot of players they like that, but it doesn't scratch the same itch that a lot of the weird subclasses from Tasha's did. Now, to speak to Mike Mearls' point about the community not really being excited, I think a lot of this has to do with commercial potential. What I mean by that is pre-OGL debacle, 5e was like the game. There were TTRPG community diehards that loved playing other systems, but as someone who wanted to get more people to play TTRPGs, D&D really was the gateway. And in addition, it was actually kind of a feature, not a bug, that the 2014 game felt less solid than 2024. It meant that there were all these weird gaps that could get filled in with homebrew published content, like on DM's Guild or DriveThruRPG. You know, it was actually kind of a feature that legendary resistances, as much as I hated that mechanic, were kind of unbalanced, because it meant a lot of publishers could add in their take for sale and make money off of it. And yes, while the OGL thing ended up in the community's favor by having the SRDs published to Creative Commons, it still left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, including my own. Like I said, I'm a fan of D&D, but I used to be a huge fan of D&D. If you look on my bookshelf behind me, I have almost every first-party published product that Wizards released for the edition. And after that, I was just like, eh. And so many people jumped ship. Like I said, they're playing other games like Drawsteel, Daggerheart, Cosmere. It doesn't feel like I have to make a 5e compatible product to know that that's where the majority of the market is going to be. Which is why I'm also developing my own system, Swiftguard. This is where my plug comes in. You can download the playtest pack in the playtest adventure in the description, but as I look to the past year, I'm not really excited about D&D. I'm excited about TTRPGs. And so yeah, I do think ultimately D&D is a little uncool again, because there are now legitimate competitors that are exciting the community more than it. It doesn't mean I think D&D is a bad system. My day job is that of a martial arts instructor. I frequently have teen students come up to me excited to share about all the things happening in their D&D games. I think it still has a legitimate place in the community, but as of right now, I feel like the 3 core books are so solid, they don't really need any additions. But hey, a year from now, maybe the design team will be reinvigorated. Maybe there will be new leadership or something and we'll be in a completely different state. But now, I want to hear what you have to say. How do you feel about the current state of Dungeons & Dragons? Do you follow every UA release that comes out? Or does it feel a little overwhelming / unnecessary? Are there any other systems that have you really excited right now? Let me know in the comments down below, and have an awesome day. Bye-bye now.